What if a machine, built in secret deep within Soviet bunkers, had the power to end humanity, and could launch the apocalypse even if no one was left alive to give the order? A machine designed not to defend a nation, but to guarantee that if it were ever destroyed, it would take the entire world down with it. This isn't science fiction. It's real. And it has a name as chilling as its purpose: Dead Hand. Dead Hand, also known by its official name, the Perimeter System, is Russia's ultimate nuclear doomsday weapon. Born out of Cold War paranoia, it was created to ensure retaliation even in the event of total annihilation. Unlike any other defense system in the world, Dead Hand was not designed to be controlled by people once a nuclear war began. It was designed to operate without them. The idea is as terrifying as it is brilliant. If Soviet leadership were wiped out in a surprise first strike, and if communication with their nuclear command was lost, this automated system would take control. It would assess conditions, measuring seismic shockwaves, radiation spikes, radio silence, and decide if a full-scale nuclear counterattack should be launched. And if those conditions were met, it would fire. Not just one missile, but all of them. This wasn't just a concept buried in Cold War nightmares. According to declassified sources and former Soviet officials, the system was not only developed, it was tested. And to this day, no one knows for certain if it has ever been deactivated. In this video, we're diving deep into one of the most terrifying and least understood military systems ever conceived. You'll learn how the Dead Hand system came to be, how it works, why it was built, and whether it could still be active today. We'll explore the geopolitical fears that gave rise to it, the real-world incidents that nearly triggered nuclear war, and the disturbing possibility that this ghost in the machine still lurks in the shadows, waiting silently for the end of the world. The birth of a doomsday idea. To understand how something like Dead Hand came into existence, we need to step back into the shadowy heart of the Cold War, a time when fear wasn't just political, it was existential. The world was divided between two superpowers, the United States and the Soviet Union. Each had nuclear arsenals large enough to destroy civilization many times over, and both knew that if one side launched a first strike, the other would retaliate in kind. This standoff created a fragile balance of terror, known as mutually assured destruction, or MAD. MAD wasn't just a theory, it was policy. The logic was simple and terrifying. If both sides could guarantee total destruction of the other in response to any attack, then no one would dare start a war. The peace of the world, such as it was, hung on this razor-thin assumption that rational actors would never choose total suicide. But humans, as history has shown, are not always rational. Systems can fail. Leaders can miscalculate. And fear, when mixed with power, can create monsters. One of the most alarming incidents occurred in 1983, during a NATO exercise known as Able Archer. Designed as a simulated nuclear conflict, the wargame was so realistic that Soviet officials believed it might be a cover for an actual attack. Intelligence reports suggested that the Kremlin went on high alert, interpreting the drill as the possible beginning of a first strike. Soviet missile units were reportedly armed and readied, just waiting for the final signal to launch. The world came closer to nuclear war than most people ever realized. This terrifying brush with annihilation left deep scars on the Soviet psyche. For Soviet military planners, it confirmed what they already feared, that the West might attempt a decapitation strike, eliminating their leadership and command structure before a proper retaliation could be launched. If the chain of command were broken, if the president and generals were killed in a surprise attack, who would strike back? How could they ensure a retaliatory blow powerful enough to fulfill the logic of man? Out of this fear, a new idea was born, one that pushed the boundaries of military technology and human ethics. If people could no longer be trusted to make decisions in the chaos of a nuclear war, maybe machines could. Maybe it was possible to build a system that would survive the initial attack and guarantee vengeance, even in the absence of human leadership. It would be automated. It would be hidden. And it would always be ready. The seeds of this concept were sown within Soviet scientific and military circles. Leading minds from institutes like the Ministry of Defense, the Strategic Rocket Forces, and top-secret research facilities began to explore how such a system could be designed. They envisioned a network of sensors that could detect nuclear detonations, seismic tremors, and radio silence. They imagined command missiles that could issue launch orders to surviving silos. The system would be cold, logical, and terrifyingly efficient. There was a strange echo of fiction in all of this. In 1964, Stanley Kubrick released the satirical film Dr. Strangelove, in which a fictional Soviet Doomsday machine triggers the end of the world automatically when attacked. The film was meant to parody the absurdity of nuclear politics, but it struck a nerve. Soviet officials reportedly took it more seriously than its creators intended. Some later claimed that Dr. Strangelove had inspired real-world thinking about automated retaliation systems. Whether art inspired life or merely mirrored it, the parallels were eerie. The Soviet Union didn't just flirt with the idea, they built it. In the secret bunkers and under the coded language of military doctrine, the perimeter system, nicknamed Dead Hand, was developed as a way to make sure that no enemy strike could go unpunished. It wasn't just about destruction. It was about sending a clear, chilling message to the world. Even if you kill us all, our machines will avenge us. This concept changed everything. It meant that even in death, a nation could retaliate. The idea of deterrence was no longer tied to the living but entrusted to cold circuits and buried cables. In trying to preserve peace, the Soviets had constructed a mechanism of absolute revenge. And once built, it would haunt the global landscape like a ghost in the system, silently threatening annihilation from the shadows. What is Dead Hand? Buried within the layers of Soviet secrecy and military doctrine lies a machine with the power to end civilization as we know it. Though popularly known by its ominous nickname, Dead Hand, the actual name of this system is Perimeter. It sounds clinical and unremarkable, but its function is anything but. The perimeter system was designed to guarantee a retaliatory nuclear strike under the most extreme and catastrophic circumstances, when there were no leaders left alive to make that decision. Unlike other nuclear defense systems that rely on human judgment, the perimeter system was engineered to act autonomously. It is, in essence, a machine programmed to ensure vengeance. If an enemy launched a first strike against the Soviet Union and successfully obliterated its leadership and command structures, perimeter would take over. It would become the brain of a dead state, capable of unleashing the full fury of the Soviet nuclear arsenal without requiring a living soul to authorize it. So how does this chilling system work? According to multiple declassified accounts and interviews with former Soviet military officials, the perimeter system was activated only under specific circumstances. It wasn't constantly online, poised to launch at the slightest provocation. Instead, it functioned as a dormant safeguard, to be turned on manually during moments of extreme geopolitical tension or imminent threat. Once activated, it would begin scanning for specific inputs that could indicate a nuclear attack was underway. Perimeter's architecture was built around a series of sensors and control systems that were both resilient and intelligent. Seismic detectors were embedded to pick up the shock waves generated by nuclear detonations. Radiation sensors would scan the environment for spikes in radioactive particles, which could confirm that a strike had occurred. Atmospheric pressure changes and light flashes were also part of the system's detection arsenal. But perhaps most disturbingly, perimeter was designed to monitor the silence of command. If the top layers of Soviet leadership failed to communicate within a specified time frame, the system would interpret it as confirmation that the government had been destroyed. If those conditions were met, detected detonations, radiation spikes, and the sudden collapse of communication chains, perimeter would respond. Not with panic, but with terrifying precision. The system would trigger what's known as a command missile. This was no ordinary weapon. It wasn't launched to destroy a target. Its purpose was to fly high into the atmosphere and act as a radio transmitter, sending a coded launch order to the remaining operational missile silos, mobile launches, and submarine fleets scattered across the vast Soviet territory. This command missile played a pivotal role in the automation of the entire system. Rather than issuing individual launch commands from central authority, which could be wiped out in a decapitation strike, the command missile served as a signal beacon. Any launch system that received its transmission would understand it as a final order: launch your warheads. Strike back. Complete the retaliation. The machines would carry out the orders that no human could deliver anymore. In theory, perimeter could eliminate the possibility of a successful first strike by any adversary. No matter how swiftly and efficiently an enemy tried to neutralize Soviet command and control, the response would still come. A rain of nuclear fire would still fall upon the attacker. This made perimeter the ultimate insurance policy in the doctrine of mutually assured destruction. What made perimeter particularly unique was its level of automation. The United States had, and still has, early warning systems and launch protocols, but all of them ultimately require human verification and decision-making. Perimeter was different. Once activated, and if the programmed conditions were met, it didn't need a general or a politician to say yes. It didn't need confirmation from a chain of command. It made the decision itself, based on what it perceived as the death of the state. This level of autonomy raised serious ethical and technical questions even within the Soviet Union. Could machines be trusted with decisions of this magnitude? Could the system malfunction? What if a natural disaster or a technical glitch mimicked the signs of a nuclear attack? Soviet engineers reportedly spent years refining the system to ensure that it would only activate under an unmistakable set of circumstances. The risk of a false launch had to be minimized to near zero. But near zero is not zero. One of the few public confirmations of Perimeter's existence came from Colonel General Vartholomew Korobushin, a former high-ranking officer in the Strategic Rocket Forces. In an interview decades after the Cold War, he described the system as real and functional, though he declined to give technical specifics. Other officials, both retired and anonymous, echoed his statements. Some hinted that the system may have even been updated over time, quietly maintained as part of Russia's nuclear deterrent, long after the Soviet Union collapsed. Descriptions from defense analysts and military insiders suggest that Perimeter's infrastructure stretched across the USSR's massive territory. Command bunkers buried deep beneath mountains, communication relays hardened against electromagnetic pulses, and isolated missile launch sites designed to operate in near-complete silence formed part of the network. In visual terms, imagine a digital nervous system running underground through cables, sensors, and bunkers, an invisible presence capable of waking up in the aftermath of destruction. Public understanding of Perimeter remains murky, and that may be intentional. Much of what is known comes from leaks, interviews, and partial declassifications. The Russian government has never provided full transparency on whether Perimeter is still active, or how much of the original system remains. But its legend persists. Western military analysts still factor it into strategic scenarios. And even today, some believe it has been modernized and integrated with newer Russian technologies. What makes Dead Hand so haunting isn't just its power, but its cold logic. It was designed to remove emotion, politics, and hesitation from the final moments of life on Earth. Once it is switched on, humanity's fate rests in the judgment of algorithms and sensors. In seeking to create an unbreakable deterrent, the Soviet Union created a machine that could decide, on its own, when the world should end. And in that silence, between the moment of devastation and the instant of retaliation, Dead Hand waits. Activation and fail-safe protocol. The terrifying power of the Dead Hand system lies not only in its existence but in the precision of its activation logic. Unlike traditional nuclear protocols where human decision-making acts as the final safeguard, the Perimeter system was engineered to operate in moments when all human control may already be lost. It is a mechanism built to launch after leadership is decapitated, infrastructure is shattered, and the only thing left is the machine. The authority to activate Dead Hand did not rest with just one individual. According to interviews with former Soviet military officials, the activation process required input from the highest levels of command, including the General Staff and Strategic Rocket Forces. However, this wasn't a casual switch. Dead Hand was designed to be activated manually during escalating crises, particularly when leadership believed a first strike by the West was imminent. Once enabled, it would not remain online indefinitely. It was kept dormant, awaiting very specific signs of catastrophe. This ensured it would not accidentally be triggered during routine operations or minor conflicts. Once activated, the system entered a mode of silent observation. It began scanning for cues that nuclear war had already begun. The first signal could be seismic disturbances, violent shockwaves picked up by underground sensors, indicating nuclear detonations had occurred. Radiation sensors would also begin tracking abnormal levels of ionizing radiation in the atmosphere. A sudden, unexplained spike in gamma radiation or thermal bursts would raise red flags. Alongside this, Perimeter monitored the nation's military communication networks. If command and control frequencies went dark, and communication from key personnel ceased, it would interpret this silence as the death of leadership. In theory, these sensors worked in unison. No single input could trigger a launch. Instead, Dead Hand required a convergence of evidence, a precise combination of data that confirmed with near certainty that a decapitation strike had taken place. If these conditions were met, the command missile would be launched. It would ascend into the sky, broadcasting a coded message to all surviving nuclear assets, ordering them to retaliate without further delay. But here is where the system becomes even more unsettling. Within this framework was the ability for the system to make the launch decision without human input. That's what separates Dead Hand from every other nuclear system on Earth. Western countries like the United States have early warning systems, but none are fully autonomous. In the US, even if missiles are inbound, final authorization must come from the president and two other officials through a secure and encrypted process. Dead Hand bypasses all of that. It was built to function when everyone is already dead. This has led to a great deal of controversy, particularly around the philosophical design of the system. Was it truly a fail-safe, a last line of defense to preserve the logic of deterrence? Or was it actually a fail-deadly system, designed to ensure total destruction no matter the cost? In other words, does it protect against accidental war, or guarantee it? Supporters of the system, including some retired Soviet generals, argue that Dead Hand was a rational tool of deterrence. They claim that no adversary could ever consider a first strike if they knew retaliation was inevitable, even if the Kremlin were wiped off the map. By automating the final phase of nuclear war, they believe it kept the peace. Opponents, however, see it differently. They worry that placing the decision to end the world in the hands of an algorithm, even one governed by strict logic, removes the last shred of humanity from the process. The room for diplomacy, hesitation, or reconsideration disappears. Comparisons with other nuclear powers highlight this chilling distinction. The United States maintains a nuclear triad with layers of redundancy and human verification. Missile detection systems, like the Defense Support Program satellites, are designed to alert leadership of a possible strike, but require human interpretation and authorization. France and the United Kingdom operate similarly, with strict civilian control over their arsenals. China, while more secretive, is believed to maintain a no-first-use policy with systems that are not fully automated. In this context, Russia's dead hand stands alone, a machine built for Judgment Day, running. There's also the mythology surrounding the idea of a dead man's switch, a concept that has fueled popular imaginations for decades. In theory, such a switch is a final trigger that activates when someone releases their hand, literally or metaphorically. The term has been applied to dead hand frequently, but it's somewhat misleading. The perimeter system doesn't require someone to hold a button. Rather, it requires someone to give it permission to wait in the dark. Once that permission is granted, it becomes its own judge, its own executor. And it waits. That's perhaps the most unsettling truth about dead hand. It doesn't rage or react. It listens. It watches. It waits for the signs of the end. It was built not to prevent a war, but to guarantee that if one started, it would finish with absolute finality. The design logic behind Dead Hand reflects the depth of Cold War paranoia, a belief that the only true safety was the assurance that no one could escape destruction. It was the ultimate embodiment of mutually assured destruction taken to its logical, brutal conclusion. Not only would the Soviet Union fire back, it wouldn't even need to be alive to do it. To this day, the full operational status of Dead Hand remains shrouded in secrecy. Some say it was dismantled after the collapse of the Soviet Union. Others insist it was upgraded and integrated into modern Russian defense strategy. Regardless of the truth, the logic it represents still casts a long shadow. It is the logic of vengeance without voice, of machines speaking when humans are gone. And that logic still lingers in the circuits of global power. Real danger or psychological weapon? The sheer terror that surrounds the Dead Hand system has turned it into one of the most enigmatic symbols of the Cold War. But was it truly operational, or was it a well-constructed illusion designed to manipulate the perception of power? This question has divided experts for decades. While many believe the system was real, others argue that its effectiveness was psychological more than technological, a strategic bluff built to hold the world hostage not with missiles, but with fear. Inside Russia and abroad, conflicting stories have emerged about whether Dead Hand was ever fully activated. On one hand, there are multiple former Soviet officials who have spoken publicly, if cautiously, about its existence and functionality. They describe it as a working system, deployed and tested, ready to act in the event of nuclear catastrophe. Colonel General Vartholomew Korobushin, a former high-ranking officer in the Strategic Rocket Forces, stated that the system was not only real but successfully integrated into the Soviet command structure during its final years. Others, such as General Vladimir Dvorkin, have provided more nuanced statements, implying that the system existed but was highly limited in scope and possibly more symbolic than functional. Western analysts are equally divided. Some intelligence assessments from the 1980s suggest that the United States believed the Soviets were capable of developing an automated nuclear retaliation system, but there was little consensus on its deployment. Declassified CIA documents from that era speculate about automated Soviet command networks but stop short of confirming any system like Dead Hand. This uncertainty may have been the point. Even if the system were only partially real, the idea of it was enough to alter global calculations. The ambiguity surrounding Dead Hand gave it an unusual power. In strategic terms, it acted as a Schrödinger's deterrent. It may or may not exist, but its existence must be assumed. That possibility alone was enough to influence military planning and diplomatic posture. The fear that Russia could retaliate automatically after a decapitation strike created a psychological barrier against first use of nuclear weapons. It made total victory impossible, no matter how successful a first strike might appear on paper. Many experts argue that Dead Hand, whether operational or not, was primarily designed as a tool of psychological warfare. It was not a system to be used, but one to be known. Its value came not from launching missiles, but from convincing adversaries that the missiles could and would be launched with or without human input. In this sense, Dead Hand mirrored other Cold War weapons that blurred the line between real capability and strategic theater. The United States had its own psychological tools, including the Strategic Defense Initiative, or Star Wars program, which promised missile shield technologies that were decades away from feasibility. Both sides played a high-stakes game of perception, where the illusion of invincibility or inevitability could matter more than the truth. The Soviet Union had a long history of employing such tactics. It often exaggerated or concealed capabilities to keep its adversaries guessing. For instance, Western military analysts later discovered that many Soviet missile silos were dummies, built to confuse spy satellites. Aircraft were routinely parked in formation to make bases appear more active than they were. In this context, Dead Hand could have been one more illusion in a long line of strategic misdirection. A threat so horrifying it didn't need to be real to be effective. Yet the existence of multiple close calls during the Cold War shows just how dangerous even the perception of such a system can be. One of the most well-known incidents occurred in 1983, the same year as the Able Archer exercise, when Soviet early warning systems falsely detected incoming American missiles. Lieutenant Colonel Stanislav Petrov was the duty officer at the time. According to the protocol, he should have reported the detection, triggering a possible retaliatory response. But Petrov chose to trust his instincts and labeled the alarm as a false trigger. He was right. The warning system had malfunctioned. His decision prevented what could have been an accidental nuclear exchange. Incidents like this raise disturbing questions about what might have happened if Dead Hand had been online. Would the system have made the same judgment? Or would it have misread the data and launched an apocalyptic retaliation? The Petrov incident highlights a vulnerability in automated systems, the absence of human intuition. A machine cannot feel doubt. It cannot hesitate. And that lack of hesitation, while central to the logic of deterrence, is also its most frightening trait. Media portrayals have only added to the mystique of Dead Hand. Films, documentaries, and novels have depicted the system as a rogue intelligence, a mechanical executioner waiting silently beneath the earth. While these portrayals are often exaggerated for drama, they tap into a very real fear, the idea that the end of the world could one day be initiated not by a person, but by a machine following instructions written decades earlier. In some cases, fictional accounts have even influenced public understanding more than official statements ever could. Even today, the uncertainty remains. Some analysts believe that parts of the perimeter system were dismantled after the fall of the Soviet Union. Others claim that it was updated and incorporated into Russia's modern military doctrine under new names and revised protocols. President Vladimir Putin himself has alluded to the existence of automated retaliation capabilities in response to NATO expansion and US missile defense systems. His remarks have never confirmed Dead Hand by name, but the implications are clear enough for analysts to take notice. Ultimately, the question of whether Dead Hand was ever fully operational may be less important than what it represents. It is the embodiment of a strategic philosophy that says survival is not as important as revenge. It is the purest expression of mutually assured destruction, one so extreme that it removes the human element entirely. Whether it was real or not, the threat was believed. And belief, in the cold logic of nuclear deterrence, is often enough. As we navigate a world where tensions are rising again, and where new technologies blur the line between man and machine, the legacy of Dead Hand lingers. It reminds us that sometimes the most dangerous weapon is not the one we see, but the one we think exists. And in the case of Russia's Doomsday machine, the line between myth and reality may be thinner than we dare to admit. Case studies and close calls. If the idea of Dead Hand terrifies you in theory, the real-world moments that brought us inches from nuclear catastrophe will chill you even further. History has already shown how a few mistaken signals, delayed communications, or human assumptions could have ended life as we know it. The Cold War and the decades that followed are littered with near-apocalyptic events. The question that haunts many military analysts isn't just how close we came to nuclear war, but what would have happened if Dead Hand had been active during one of those moments. The most infamous case in this long list of close calls took place on the night of September 26, 1983. At a Soviet early warning facility just outside Moscow, Lieutenant Colonel Stanislav Petrov was on duty when the unthinkable happened. A sudden alert appeared on the screens. The Soviet missile detection system was reporting that the United States had launched 5 intercontinental ballistic missiles. Protocol dictated that Petrov should immediately report this up the chain of command. The next steps would have likely involved launching a full-scale retaliation before the missiles landed. But Petrov hesitated. Something about the situation didn't feel right. He reasoned that if the US were launching a real attack, they wouldn't do it with just 5 missiles. They would go all in. He decided to mark the alert as a false alarm. Later investigations confirmed his instinct was correct. The system had misinterpreted sunlight reflecting off clouds as incoming missiles. Petrov's decision to disobey protocol and trust his gut may have prevented the start of World War III. Now imagine that scenario if Dead Hand had been activated. There would have been no Petrov. No human presence to question the data or doubt the logic. If the sensors had been active, and if the communications network had misfired or gone dark for any reason, the system could have interpreted the event as the real thing. The command missile would have launched. And the world might have ended not in fire from human hatred, but from a glitch in the circuitry. Another terrifying moment came more than a decade later, long after the Cold War had officially ended. On January 25, 1995, Norwegian and American scientists launched a research rocket from a site in Norway to study the Northern Lights. The launch had been pre-approved and notified to the Russian government, but the message never reached the right desks. Russian radar operators detected the rocket and interpreted its trajectory as resembling that of a US submarine-launched missile. The information was quickly relayed to President Boris Yeltsin, who for the first time in history activated the Russian nuclear briefcase, known as the Cheget. Military commanders prepared for a possible retaliation strike. For several minutes, Russia's nuclear arsenal stood on the edge of activation, waiting for confirmation that the rocket was part of a larger attack. Fortunately, the situation was clarified in time. The rocket's payload dropped into the ocean, and the alert was cancelled. This incident demonstrates just how fragile the chain of communication can be in a nuclear-armed world. If the perimeter system had been on standby that day, and if certain signals had failed to transmit or been misinterpreted, the scenario could have escalated far beyond a diplomatic misunderstanding. An atmospheric research mission could have turned into a trigger for global war. Looking back even further, the Cuban Missile Crisis of 1962 remains one of the most studied and feared standoffs in modern history. For 13 days, the United States and the Soviet Union teetered on the brink of all-out nuclear war over the presence of Soviet missiles in Cuba. American reconnaissance flights detected the missile installations, and President John F. Kennedy demanded their removal. The world watched as both sides exchanged threats and mobilized forces. What is often forgotten is how close the crisis came to spiraling out of control due to miscommunication and independent military actions. One such moment occurred when a US Navy destroyer dropped signaling depth charges near a Soviet submarine, the B-59, which was armed with a nuclear torpedo. The submarine, believing it was under attack, considered launching the torpedo. The only thing that stopped it was a unanimous vote by the 3 senior officers on board. One of them, Vasily Arkhipov, refused to authorize the strike, thereby preventing a possible nuclear war. Again, it was human restraint that saved the world. Dead Hand, however, does not vote. It does not deliberate. It does not wait. Fast forward to more recent history, and the nuclear threat has not disappeared. In 2010, tensions between North Korea and South Korea escalated after the sinking of the South Korean warship Kyonan. North Korea denied responsibility, but South Korean forces were put on alert. The situation was compounded by the presence of US troops and military assets in the region. In another incident, North Korea launched a missile that passed over Japanese territory, triggering emergency broadcasts and public panic. These are the kind of events where confusion, faulty intelligence, or rapid escalation could spiral into disaster. Then there was the 2018 false missile alert in Hawaii. For 38 minutes, residents believed a ballistic missile was inbound. The alert, sent by human error during a routine test, caused widespread panic. Although the alert was quickly identified as a mistake, the psychological damage was already done. People ran for cover, called loved ones, and braced for impact. It revealed how fragile our emergency systems really are, and how easily they can trigger chaos. What ties all of these cases together is the same frightening pattern: human systems breaking down in moments of extreme stress. Whether through technical failure, miscommunication, or overreaction, the line between peace and annihilation has often depended on the decisions of a few individuals in high-pressure environments. Each of these moments could have gone differently. And with dead hand, they might have. The terrifying strength of the perimeter system lies in its ability to bypass all the human safeguards that averted disaster in these real events. Petrov's intuition, Arkapov's restraint, Yeltsin's patience, none of those qualities exist in a machine. Dead hand cannot pause to think, second-guess, or question orders. It only calculates, detects, and acts. That is what makes it so dangerous. These close calls are not just historical footnotes. They are reminders that nuclear war doesn't require malice. It only requires a mistake. And if such a mistake were to occur with dead hand active, the consequences would be irreversible. In a world of increasing automation, rising tensions, and fragile diplomacy, these stories are more than just history. They are warnings. Warnings of just how close we've already come to pressing the final button. Is dead hand still active? For decades, the world has asked one unsettling question that refuses to go away. Is the Soviet Union's Doomsday system, dead hand, still active today? The answer remains hidden behind layers of secrecy, ambiguity, and conflicting signals. But the clues that have emerged over the last 20 years suggest that while the Cold War may have ended, the machinery built to survive it may still be alive and functional. After the collapse of the Soviet Union in 1991, many assumed that the perimeter system, like much of the old military infrastructure, had been dismantled or simply abandoned. Russia was in disarray. The economy was collapsing, command structures were weakening, and the country was struggling to redefine its identity on the global stage. For a time, it seemed unlikely that a highly sophisticated and resource-intensive system like Dead Hand could have remained operational. But as Russia began to rebuild, reassert itself militarily, and challenge NATO's eastern expansion, quiet indications began to emerge that the system might never have been fully deactivated. In the early 2000s, a few former Russian defense officials began hinting in interviews and publications that perimeter still existed in some form. Some claimed it had been upgraded. Others suggested it had been placed in storage, ready to be reactivated in times of extreme tension. While no official documents were ever released to confirm these claims, the lack of direct denial from the Russian government has only fueled speculation. In a state where military secrecy is paramount, silence often speaks volumes. Throughout the 2010s, tensions between Russia and the West began to escalate once more. NATO's expansion into Eastern Europe, the US withdrawal from arms control treaties like the Anti-Ballistic Missile Treaty and the Intermediate-Range Nuclear Forces Treaty, and the deployment of missile defense systems in Poland and Romania all contributed to a sense of encirclement in Moscow. Russian military doctrine began to shift back toward Cold War-era thinking, emphasizing the importance of nuclear deterrence and asymmetric retaliation. In this climate, the existence of a fully autonomous retaliatory system like Dead Hand would be seen not just as useful, but as essential. By 2014, the annexation of Crimea and the outbreak of war in eastern Ukraine sent geopolitical shockwaves across the globe. Russia's military posture became more aggressive, and its rhetoric more defiant. It was during this period that President Vladimir Putin began making frequent public statements about Russia's nuclear capabilities. While he never referenced Dead Hand directly, he often spoke in ominous tones about Russia's ability to respond to any existential threat, even if the country itself were obliterated. In 2018, Russian state television aired a now infamous segment showing maps of US targets that would be hit in the event of nuclear war. These included military installations and government centers along the East Coast. The broadcast also mentioned several weapon systems believed to be capable of delivering these strikes, including the Poseidon underwater drone and the Avangard hypersonic glide vehicle. While the segment did not explicitly connect these platforms to Dead Hand, it was part of a broader campaign to signal that Russia retains a second strike capability powerful enough to deter even the most advanced first strike technologies. It's during moments like these that speculation about perimeter resurfaces. If Russia believes that the United States and NATO are pursuing a strategy capable of decapitating its leadership in a surprise attack, then the logic that led to Dead Hand's creation still applies. In fact, it may apply even more now than during the Cold War. With modern communications relying heavily on satellites, which are vulnerable to cyber attacks and anti-satellite weapons, the chance of losing centralized command during a nuclear crisis has increased. An automated backup system, immune to human error or interruption, would serve as the ultimate failsafe. In recent years, satellite imagery and open-source intelligence analysis have identified renewed activity around known and suspected military command centers in Russia. Sites like Mount Yamantau in the southern Urals, long rumored to be part of Russia's strategic command infrastructure, have shown signs of expansion. Underground complexes once thought to be relics of the Cold War are being upgraded with modern communications arrays, hardened structures, and new transportation links. These developments suggest preparation for continuity of government operations in the event of a catastrophic strike, exactly the kind of environment where Dead Hand would be expected to operate. Analysts have also pointed to the modernization of Russia's nuclear command and control systems, including new encrypted digital networks, satellite communications, and command posts deep underground. While these improvements could simply be part of a broader technological update, they also fit the pattern of a system being retooled for reliability in worst-case scenarios. In a world where hypersonic weapons and cyber warfare can compress decision-making timelines to mere minutes, automated systems become increasingly attractive, even necessary. Yet the question persists. Would Russia really keep such a system operational? And if so, could it still be trusted to work as intended? Many modern analysts warn that aging infrastructure combined with new threats like cyber intrusions could make an automated system like Dead Hand more dangerous than ever. While Cold War-era threats focused on physical destruction, today's risks include spoofed signals, data manipulation, and digital warfare. A system designed in the 1980s may not be fully equipped to handle the complexities of modern digital conflict. Still, the mystery remains unsolved. Russia has never confirmed the current status of perimeter. Official statements are rare and vague. When asked directly about the existence of Dead Hand, Russian officials either deflect or refuse to comment. Military experts who speak about it do so carefully, often avoiding direct claims but confirming its past existence. The uncertainty is part of its power. As long as the world believes the system might still be active, it serves its purpose as a deterrent. Is a machine from the Cold War still part of modern warfare? If Dead Hand has survived through decades of political collapse, economic turmoil, and technological evolution, then it is not just a relic, it is a living weapon. A silent sentinel buried beneath the earth, waiting for the end. The idea that such a system could still exist in today's high-tech battlefield is both surreal and deeply plausible. In the absence of confirmation, all we can do is read between the lines. And the signs suggest that Dead Hand, or something very much like it, still lurks in the background of global security. Whether reactivated, redesigned, or merely replaced with a new name, its shadow continues to stretch across the modern world. The question is no longer whether it was real, but whether we are prepared to live in a future where such systems could be awakened once more. Technological ethics and global security. The idea of trusting a machine with the end of the world was once unthinkable. But with systems like Dead Hand, that idea moved from the pages of science fiction into geopolitical reality. As technology evolves and global tensions rise, the question becomes even more urgent. Can we truly trust artificial systems with extinction-level decisions? And what does it mean for global security when the judgment to end humanity might rest in the hands of code, sensors, and algorithms? Dead Hand is the most dramatic example of this dilemma, but it is no longer unique. Around the world, military powers are increasingly integrating artificial intelligence and automation into their strategic systems. The United States, China, Israel, and Russia are all developing AI-driven tools for surveillance, threat detection, and even battlefield decision-making. These systems are not yet making choices about global nuclear war, but the trajectory is clear. Machines are being asked to do more. to decide faster, to interpret complex data in real time, and eventually, if we're not careful, to make life and death decisions without human input. The development of AI-based military systems raises serious ethical and philosophical challenges. The logic behind them is often centered around speed. In a world where hypersonic missiles can cross continents in minutes and cyber attacks can disrupt communications in seconds, there is a growing belief among military planners that automated systems are necessary to respond quickly and effectively. But speed comes at a cost. The faster a system acts, the less time there is for reflection, judgment, or restraint. The United States, for example, maintains fail-safe protocols designed to require multiple layers of human verification before a nuclear strike can be authorized. The president carries the nuclear football, but even then, at least two people must confirm the launch orders using separate codes and secure systems. These protocols are intentionally slow compared to what machines could do. They exist to prevent rash decisions, misunderstandings, or unauthorized actions. But some critics argue that this caution could become a vulnerability if an adversary develops the capability to strike faster and destroy command centers before a response can be launched. This is the very fear that led to the creation of Dead Hand. The potential consequences of automation extend beyond just speed. One of the gravest concerns in today's digital age is cybersecurity. If an automated nuclear retaliation system were ever compromised by a cyber attack, the results could be catastrophic. Imagine a scenario in which an adversary feeds false data into a system like Dead Hand, triggering it to believe that a nuclear strike has occurred. Or worse, imagine a hacker gaining access to the internal protocols and launching a false command. The very system designed to ensure national survival could become the instrument of its destruction. Modern cyber warfare has already shown that even the most secure systems can be breached. No network is truly invulnerable. And no amount of encryption can fully eliminate the risk of deception or manipulation. There is also the broader question of whether deterrence justifies the existence of such systems. Supporters argue that the logic of mutually assured destruction still holds, and that machines can enforce this logic more reliably than fallible humans. In their view, systems like Dead Hand prevent war by guaranteeing that any attack will be met with overwhelming retaliation, no matter what. But others see this as a dangerous illusion. They argue that deterrence based on automation increases the risk of accidental war, miscommunication, and irreversible escalation. The idea that machines could keep the peace by holding the world hostage may be appealing to some military strategists, but it poses a moral challenge for humanity as a whole. As these debates continue, international organizations and arms control advocates are sounding the alarm. The United Nations has repeatedly called for greater transparency and regulation of autonomous weapons systems. Talks surrounding nuclear disarmament, arms control treaties, and AI governance have gained renewed urgency in recent years. Proposals have been made to ban fully autonomous lethal systems altogether, or at least ensure that meaningful human control remains in the decision-making loop. But progress is slow. Major powers are reluctant to give up what they see as strategic advantages, and verification mechanisms are difficult to implement in secretive military programs. The challenge is further compounded by the lack of public understanding. Most people around the world are unaware that machines like Dead Hand have ever existed. Fewer still realize that similar systems may be under development today. Without widespread awareness and pressure, political leaders have little incentive to change course. And so, the status quo remains. A global security architecture built on the silent threat of annihilation, powered by increasingly intelligent machines. What makes this even more unsettling is the pace at which technology is advancing. Artificial intelligence is becoming more capable. Decision-making algorithms are becoming more autonomous. And geopolitical stability is becoming more fragile. These trends are converging at a dangerous moment in history. As old treaties fall apart and new weapons are developed, the idea of giving machines the power to decide the fate of nations no longer seems hypothetical. It is becoming a strategic option on the table. In this emerging reality, Dead Hand is not just a relic. It is a warning. A symbol of what happens when fear, technology, and strategy collide without enough reflection. It represents the darkest side of human innovation, the impulse to build systems so powerful that even their creators cannot fully control them. Whether still active or not, the logic that created Dead Hand lives on. And unless the world confronts that logic head-on, we may one day wake up in a world where the final decision is no longer ours to make. The debate is not just about technology. It is about values. Do we want a world where machines enforce peace through the threat of instant destruction? Or do we believe that the responsibility for such decisions must always remain in human hands? These are not questions for future generations. They are questions for today. And the answers will shape the path of global security for decades to come. The ghost in the system. Dead Hand is not just a machine. It is a symbol of everything that defines the nuclear age: paranoia, power, fear, and the relentless pursuit of control in a world where control is always slipping through our fingers. It was born from the belief that no enemy should ever escape retaliation, even if it meant leaving the final strike in the hands of sensors, circuits, and cold algorithms. It embodies a terrifying logic: that survival is less important than vengeance, and that a nation can choose to live on only through the destruction it leaves behind. What makes Dead Hand so disturbing is not just its capability, but its silence. It does not threaten loudly. It does not need to. It waits. It listens. And if it is still active, buried beneath layers of modern defense upgrades and digital command protocols, then one chilling question remains unanswered. Who really controls the end of the world? Is it a president? A general? Or is it now a system too vast, too buried, and too autonomous to be reined in? This is the future we now face, not one defined solely by diplomacy or war, but by automation, escalation, and uncertainty. As AI-driven weapon systems emerge across the globe, and as tensions rise between nuclear states, the ghost of dead hand lingers in the background. It reminds us that our most advanced technologies may outlive our own judgment. That one day, a decision might be made not by a human hand trembling over a launch key, but by a machine following orders written decades earlier. So we ask you, the viewer, should any country have the power to end the world automatically? Should humanity ever entrust extinction to a program? Or is it time to reconsider the tools we've built in the name of peace, before they decide, without warning, that peace is no longer possible? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. Because in a world haunted by machines like Dead Hand, the conversation we have now might be the